Sergeant McCauley, what are some of the main points you want to discuss involving this collision?
Okay, so some of the points I want to go back from the beginning and start with the overview of what happened here. So on Wednesday evening at about 10:24 p.m., officers received information involving the protest group who was walking westbound on California Avenue in the 3100 block that a pedestrian was involved in a traffic collision. Officers responded to the scene. The first units that were there were actually undercover units that were there within a matter of a few minutes to begin rendering medical aid to the pedestrian that was struck in the roadway. Additional officers responded, and additional officers ended up going to where the driver had pulled over at the first available intersection at California and Elm Street, where the driver was detained at that location. Some of the information that was going around so far on social media here, and some of the things we want to address here, is that one of the first posts that's going on to clarify immediately is that the driver was not, correction, that the pedestrian was not on the sidewalk or on the median, the pedestrian was in the roadway. This has been confirmed by witnesses that were on the scene. At least 3 different witness statements show that the pedestrian was in the roadway, as well as camera recordings from the area that showed the victim was in the roadway, actually moving northbound across the intersection towards the center median at the time of the collision. The driver was traveling, the bulk of the group of the protesters at that point were walking westbound in the westbound lanes. There was a few protesters, area of 4 or 5 from the estimates I've seen, and from what you can tell on the video, that were walking, for whatever reason, westbound in the eastbound lanes of travel. If you can see on the video that was released through some of the news outlets and some of the other information earlier today, you can see that the roadway is clearly open and there's a steady flow of vehicles traveling eastbound on California Avenue through that area. So the driver was struck in the roadway and not on the sidewalk and not on the median. One of the other rumors going on is that the driver involved had their headlights off. You can clearly see in the video that the driver did not have their headlights off. Their headlights were on at the time of the collision. At least 3 witnesses on the scene placed the driver's speed anywhere between 30 and 50 miles an hour in a 45 mile per hour road. There's at least 2 people on the scene that were around and at the group that witnessed the collision that believed that the driver had attempted to avoid the collision by swerving to the right prior to it occurring. Another part that's coming up here is this was not a hit and run. The driver pulled about 150 yards away from the collision and entered the first side street and waited there for law enforcement to arrive. One of the videos that's gone very quickly around social media is addressing the officer's response, showing them walking, and people believe that this is walking casually to where the victim was needing aid. At the point where that video is starting to show, the victim was already receiving aid. Officers, again, UC officers first, as well as additional uniformed officers and then medical aid personnel, tended to the victim first and were rendering aid as soon as they arrived on scene. And the additional officers that were walking to detain the driver, who had pulled over and was waiting on scene. As in any traffic collision, we do not go through any major traffic collision investigation and immediately handcuff and detain the driver, unless there is immediate cause to believe that it's an obvious crime or something to show that they are trying to flee or something to show that they have obvious impairment. The driver was there, the driver was cooperative and was detained by officers. They were taken to the transport to the Bakersfield Police Department, where further evaluations were conducted involving sobriety or any influence of drugs and alcohol. Statement was obtained. Officers from our major collision investigative team went back out and worked everything in the roadway as far as to indicate the speeds and everything else that's going here. We've put out from the very first release requesting any information from anyone that was on scene or has video recordings or any information related to this collision. And a lot of people have shared information on social media. Very few people, if any, have reached out to our investigators to give their statement to officers. We are still seeking that information. This investigation is open. It has been open since day 1. The statements that it appeared that the pedestrian was believed to potentially be at fault for the collision was based on the video evidence that we'd seen and the witness statements that we obtained at that point. That's where we are in this investigation right now. The investigation is still open. We're still going to do further examinations of the vehicle, further examinations of the computers in the vehicle that estimate speed and indicate a time of collision, can get the acceleration and its data prior to this. We're going to continue to seek out witness statements. We have video from 2 different angles that show the driver's speed going into the intersection there and show their movements at that time. We have a 3rd angle that we're trying to get the video from still, and we're still seeking out anyone that has information related to this here. So by all means, please contact Bakersfield Police Department or Officer Chad Ott, who is the lead investigator on this incident, to provide information. I want to take a few minutes here. I'm sure we have a lot here. If you have questions we want to know here, I want to answer this. I want to address this and dispel any rumors if possible.
So one of the questions we're receiving is they've heard on social media that the pedestrian was kneeling in the roadway or on the sidewalk. Was he kneeling at the time of the collision?
No, the pedestrian was not kneeling at the time of the collision. It can very definitively be seen in the video that the pedestrian was moving northbound across the lanes of travel from the number 2 lane to the number 1 lane. For those of you who don't understand those terminology, it's the first lane, the southernmost lane. He was in that lane of travel, moving between vehicles that were traveling eastbound on California Avenue, and moved out and tried to run in front and passed into the center median in front of the vehicle that struck him, and that's where he was struck, in the roadway. He was not kneeling and he was in the roadway.
And were there any passengers in the vehicle?
There was a passenger in the vehicle.
Okay. Was that passenger interviewed for this investigation?
That passenger has not been interviewed at this time. At that point, there was a large group of people walking towards the vehicle, and that passenger fled from the scene. The driver, however, remained.
Okay. One other question we're receiving, so people that were at the scene said that the front windshield was cracked and that there was blood on that. Is that indicative of a crime or of a collision? What does that tell us?
It does show that the pedestrian was in fact struck by this car, and actually further supports that the pedestrian was not kneeling at the time of the collision. As you can see in the video and the clip that's been released to some of the media outlets here, the person is run and leap into the center median, and which shows why they got up farther on the vehicle and ended up striking the windshield as part of the collision.
And for our viewers just now tuning in, was the driver under the influence?
No, the driver was evaluated for sobriety of drugs and alcohol and showed no signs to be under the influence. There's also another point to go through here, is there was no altercation prior to this. No one is reporting any kind of altercation with protesters or showing anything as far as peace disturbance or anything that would show that the driver had malcontent for the protesters in the area as well.
Okay, and do you have any number on how many witnesses that we have had come forward or submit evidence?
We've had 4 witness statements so far. We have, again, 2 video angles that we have, and we're working on a 3rd angle that we're trying to get the video downloaded from, and we're continuing to seek any other witnesses that have information related to this incident.
Okay, so one more time as we're closing this out for our viewers just now tuning in, how can they submit evidence or report anything that they have relating to this?
Okay. You can do one of 2 ways. You can contact the Bakersfield Police Department at 661-327-7111, and they can connect you with the investigators, or you can email directly Officer Chad Ott. It's COTT@bakersfieldpd.us to submit your information if you want to contact regarding witness statement, or if you have video information. I do know during a lot of these protests there's been a lot of video taken and a lot of information out there. If anyone has anything else that would shed light on everything that occurred that evening, please submit to the Bakersfield Police Department. I want to remind people that participating in what had been a peaceful protest at that point in the evening is in no way a crime, and there should be no reason that anybody should be shy about coming forward to speak up and show what they saw in that incident. And we want to remind anyone that has information in this to please come forward and talk to us about it.
Okay, thank you so much.